Trump is expected to press his NATO counterparts to raise defense spending at the annual summit of the military alliance in Brussels. The US president has been unleashing scathing attacks on America's traditional allies ahead of the meeting, which will be followed by a one-on-one with Russian President Vladimir Putin. SABC's Europe correspondent Jack Parrock reports.
He's been president for a year and a half now, but has continued his campaign-style rallies and uses them to bash America's allies.
The United States of America was the piggy bank that everybody was robbing. And let me tell you, our allies, in many cases, were worse than our enemies.
He'll be demanding those allies hit their 2% of GDP defence spending pledges at the NATO summit here in Brussels. 1 year ago at the same meeting, he infamously pushed past the Montenegrin Prime Minister and insisted NATO allies boost defence spending. The head of NATO isn't worried, though.
I'm absolutely confident that President Trump and the United States is committed to NATO and to the transatlantic bond, because that's not only something the President has stated very clearly.
And the US has actually increased its military presence in Eastern Europe since Donald Trump took office. The leaders will use the summit to look at tensions with Russia and assess missions in Afghanistan and the Mediterranean. Many here in Europe want to keep the president focused on those issues.
I think the hope here in Europe is that the officials around him, the people with more experience, the people who have wider interests, basically a bigger understanding of history, that perhaps they can prevail. But when he tweets and says such destructive things, it does pick up. I mean, perceptions matter.
After the NATO summit, Donald Trump will head to the UK, where he's set to be welcomed by widespread protests across the country as he meets Prime Minister Theresa May and the Queen. Then after a stopover in Scotland, he'll head to Helsinki to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin. America's traditional allies here in Europe worry that President Trump is going to try and buddy up with the Russian leader while they're all hardening their stance against Moscow. Jack Parrock, SABC News, Brussels.